In 3 days on Halloween, we are going to have one of the most anticipated and hyped up new Rune launches happening over on Bitcoin. And in this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about Memento Mori and how to actually prepare for it. Without further ado, let's get into it. Now, before getting into Memento Mori, I wanted to give you guys a quick background on the Bitcoin ecosystem and where it's at for those that don't know. If you haven't been paying attention to Bitcoin, it is literally the Wild West when it comes to layer 1 and even L2s in general, where every single week it seems like there's a new token standard or meta protocol or operating software or something new and innovative happening on the chain. And about 2 years ago now, Casey was actually the first person to make an NFT or an ordinal over on the Bitcoin layer 1. And about a year and a half later, about 6 months ago, was when the first Rune was created, which was also from Casey. Now, we had different token standards over on Bitcoin like BRC20, but the Rune standard uses a UTXO model that has a lot of different benefits and advantages. And over the past 6 or 7 months, there have been some such as Dog or Billion Dollar Cat that have gained a decent amount of momentum in the space, with Dog at one point hitting a $1 billion market cap. And I think right now it's somewhere around 450 to 500 million. Now, there was a boring phase for a while, but the reason that I bring up Casey here is that he is one of the most well-known or the well-known person when it comes to stuff happening on the Bitcoin ecosystem, because he really has pioneered a lot in the space. And he actually started a podcast called Hell Money Podcast, where he talks about a lot of different stuff happening over on Bitcoin. The reason that I'm bringing this up is that Casey has never actually released any sort of token. The only thing he did was that he inscribed this skull that represents Memento Mori, which is a representation of the inevitableness of death, and he inscribed this as the very first inscription. And now, just recently, in the past 2 weeks, he announced that he's going to be launching a rune called Memento Mori, and 50% of the supply is actually going to get airdropped to people that subscribe to his Hell Money Podcast Patreon. The other 50% is going to be available to etch on October 31st. And if you don't know what etching is, it is basically minting the token. And what's really interesting on Bitcoin is there's not actually a mint price where the funds go to the creator, but instead all you have to do is pay for the gas fees and you get this token. Now, what's interesting is over on Bitcoin, you can change how much gas you're spending in order to etch these different things, and it ends up being a gas war. And very similar to Ethereum, if your transaction is too slow, you end up not getting the token at all. Shout out to this guy FIFO, where he made kind of a little bit of a guide on how to actually mint this. And one of the things that I want to say is, if you're new to Bitcoin and you've never etched or minted something before, then I would probably not get involved in this, because the amount of gas that people are going to be spending is going to be insane. And if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have the proper tech setup or the UTXO management and all this a little bit additional complicated stuff, then you're probably just going to waste your money on these gas fees and get no tokens at all. I will have his little guide in the description if you want to do it. He even suggests potentially sitting out, but there's different websites out there such as Rune Blaster, for example, where you can actually prepare some of your UTXOs and then you can send a bunch of transactions at the same time. Just be prepared though, you're most likely going to get wrecked when you do this. This is a very hyped launch simply because it is from the founder himself of Ordinals and Runes, and he's actually launching his own token. Another really interesting thing that I want to say here is over on Bitcoin, you can actually have a parent inscription. And this is inscription number 0 or 1. I can't remember off of the top of my head if they started at 0 or 1, but they're actually using this parent inscription for the children or for the runes or the Memento Mori runes in this example. And that means these Memento Mori runes are going to have this as their parent inscription, which has a lot more provenance in the Bitcoin space. It's almost like they're able to get the number 0, number 1 serial number for these runes that they're now creating, because they're able to tie this directly with the skull, which represents Memento Mori, and it's dropping on Halloween from Casey, who's the founder of Runes and this first ordinal. So like when you take a step back and you look at the story and the provenance and the narrative behind it, it is literally like checking off so many boxes. And I think that's why there's so much hype behind it. As far as the token supply and some of the plans, Casey had mentioned in his podcast that there are no plans for this actual token. There's no utility, there's no roadmap. It is literally them dropping the token. They might mention it a couple times on their personal Twitter and in the podcast, gas, but that's pretty much it. So don't expect any utility from this. They also are giving 50% of their tokens to people that were subscribed to their Patreon. We have no idea how this airdrop is actually going to take place for their Patreon holders. We do know that there's different tiers, 5, 10, 20, 50, and $100 tiers. I'm guessing they're going to get different weights when it comes to the algorithm, and then they might even give a bonus for people that have been subbed to their Patreon for a longer amount of time. But we don't actually know how this is going to take place. Now you're probably wondering, well, okay, this is hype. I see the narrative behind it. I see why it can do well. Well, what's the strategy? Well, the main strategy, guys, was actually subscribing to his Patreon, because you are now going to be able to get his airdrop. The problem is so many people were subscribing that the Patreon actually got shut down, so you can't actually subscribe anymore. The other problem is if you go to etch it, you probably are going to be too slow and just lose a lot of money. So it's one of those situations where it's like, if you go to etch it and you're successful, you'll probably make money, but you'll probably end up not being successful. And then let's say you wanted to get the airdrop. Well, now it's too late and you can't subscribe to the Patreon, so you can't get the tokens that way. And I believe there were about 3,400 people that were subscribed to their Patreon before it closed. So your only other solution in this situation, if you're watching this video now, is to potentially buy on the secondary market when it goes on Magic Eden. But I personally have no idea where this token is going to go, because about 50% of the supply was free and could just be dumped, or these were going to diamond-handed people that are now going to hold on to this. And this is totally not financial advice either, but if I was to guess where this market cap is going to go, I would probably say anywheres from like 10 million to 25 million. I'm looking at Billion Dollar Cat, it's at 74 million. Dog Go to the Moon is 480 million. Pups is about 115 million. So I think it wouldn't be crazy to expect somewhere between 10 and 30 million dollar market cap, at least in the short to mid term. And if it's actually below 10 million, maybe that would be a decent gamble play. The only problem is, guys, is that there's no additional plans of utility or anything like that for this token. So I don't know how much long-term adoption they're going to get, or if the community is actually going to really try to take this token to the next level, CTO style. One of the final things I actually wanted to mention here is I actually made a post about this as soon as we found out that there could be a potential airdrop in our Jelly Cubes Discord. And I told our whole entire community to go in and make a Patreon account, because the numbers and the upside was so high on actually getting this airdrop. And luckily, not only myself, but a lot of people in our community actually were able to get their Patreon in time before that closed. And personally, I think that is going to have insane returns if you were in the Patreon, based on the expected market cap and the total amount of people on their Patreon. And it's crazy that they actually shut it down, because now all of a sudden there's a much less diluted actual supply going to everyone that signed up in their Patreon. When I first saw it, there were only like 1,100, and within a day or two, it had gone all the way up to 3,400. So this is where it kind of pays to be in different communities like Jelly Cubes, for example, where now all of a sudden I can make a quick post about it and you can get in before there's these different cutoffs. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up everything you guys have to know about it. You will be able to buy and sell it on Magic Eden on the 31st after it's done etching. I don't believe there's any centralized exchanges lined up, but I'm sure Gate.io or OKX or MEXC will probably add this in sometime within the first month or so, just based on the demand and the narrative, blah, 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 blah. And at the end of the day, it is definitely worth paying attention to. And if you are someone more familiar with how to actually etch this stuff, maybe you take a gamble and you try getting in, and hopefully you aren't too slow. That pretty much wraps up this video though. Hope y'all enjoyed it. If you want more Bitcoin content, make sure to subscribe, and I'll catch y'all later.